What were the ramifications of intervening in that review process?
What message does that send to the troops?
Well, what message does it send?
That you can get away with things. We have to have good order and discipline. It's the backbone of what we do.
What's wrong with following a lawful order from the commander-in-chief?
Nothing. Everyone should follow a lawful order. That's good order and discipline. I could not, in my conscience, do this.
Earlier this week, Navy Secretary Richard Spencer was forced to resign after refusing to follow through on orders from Donald Trump to intervene in the murder trial of Chief Petty Officer Edward Gallagher. He's a Navy SEAL who was charged with shooting unarmed civilians in Iraq and for posing with a picture with a teenaged ISIS detainee who he was accused of killing. This latter charge, posing for inappropriate photos with the dead captive, is the one that Gallagher was convicted of earlier this year. Military officials ordered his demotion as part of his punishment. That is, of course, until Donald Trump intervened and reversed the decision. This marks Trump's third intervention in a case involving an accused war criminal. He issued full pardons for the first two, but this is certainly not the first time in recent American history that an embattled president made such a disturbing intervention. On April 1st, 1971, Richard Nixon ordered the release of Lieutenant William Calley, who was sentenced to life in prison for the premeditated killing of 22 unarmed civilians in Vietnam on March 16, 1968. Other men in his troop killed hundreds more in that rampage, which became known as the My Lai Massacre. But he was the only one ever convicted of his crimes. And joining me now is Naveed Jamali, columnist for Newsweek, and Malcolm Nance, MSNBC contributor and author of The Plot to Betray America. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. And I want to let each of you answer the question, and I'll let you start, Malcolm. What are the implications of Donald Trump both excusing, then elevating, and now apparently planning to campaign with this person who he's allowing to also keep his Navy SEAL pin?
Well, the implications are dire for the armed forces. And, the Secretary of the Navy was absolutely right. But what he left off in his interview was the good order and discipline that is going to be broken here is the belief that now anyone in naval special warfare or throughout the Navy in its whole, anyone who is in a combat zone can do whatever they want. And that if it is pleasing to the President of the United States, even though it may be outside the Uniform Code of Military Justice, even though your own team members may turn you in, even though it may amount to a war crime, such as these three cases that Trump has pardoned, two of whom are really murderers, that he just let off just in that Cali-like fashion that Nixon did. Donald Trump has decided he likes war criminals, and that he calls them war fighters, a new word that he's adopted. Need I remind you that he is a 5-time draft dodger? He refused to serve in a war which would have tested his mettle as a man, and he hid behind his father to go get a deferment so that he wouldn't have to actually fight and make tough moral decisions here. But one last point. The people who are not being lauded here, the people who are not being asked to campaign for Donald Trump, are those service members who did not commit crimes, who did not go out and kill people and civilians. Donald Trump wants this type of person around him. He thinks he's a mafia boss, he's the head of a criminal clan, and he thinks that having these brutal foot soldiers around him is macho. It's nothing. It's dishonorable and cowardice.
And let me play you the Richard Spencer, the now fired Navy Secretary, what he said in a CBS interview about the very same topic, about Donald Trump's attitude toward military fighters.
I don't think he really understands the full definition of a warfighter. A warfighter is a profession of arms, and a profession of arms has standards that they have to be held to, and they hold themselves to.
And, he got really involved in this. This is what Spencer wrote in an op-ed about what the White House did. On November 14, partly because the president had already contacted me twice, I sent him a note asking him not to get involved in these questions. The next day, White House counsel Pat Cipollone called me and said the president would remain involved. Shortly thereafter, I received a second call from Cipollone, who said the president would order me to restore Gallagher to the rank of chief. This was a shocking and unprecedented intervention, a low-level review. It was also a reminder that the president has very little understanding of what it means to be in the military to fight ethically or to be governed by a uniform set of rules and practices. Because, of course, Naveed, he didn't serve. He had the opportunity, and he refused because he claims he had bone spurs, but he certainly didn't go. It is a reminder that the only time that I've ever heard of this before was the My Lai massacre, which was covered up, unfortunately, by the military, but which at least one person was supposed to be punished. But Nixon, in this case, intervened. And that's for you, Naveed.
That's right. And I mean, we talk about My Lai. It's important to remember, Joy, another name that we don't often talk about, Hugh Thompson Jr. If it wasn't for Thompson Jr., who was flying a helicopter over My Lai, who actually saw American troops massacring Vietnamese civilians, he actually landed his helicopter between American troops and Vietnamese civilians and ordered his crew to point their weapons at the American troops to stop them from massacring civilians. And he was actually the one who went and filed a report and pushed and testified in front of Congress and pushed for investigation. You know, as awful as these things are, it's important to understand that there is still good. I mean, we saw with Lieutenant Colonel Vindman that there is this idea of honor. There's an idea of sense of duty, that you're here taking an oath to the Constitution, the idea of a moral compass. You know, Trump is amoral. We've seen it time and time again. Eddie Gallagher is not someone that should be held up as this, you know, as Malcolm was saying, a war fighter. It's important to understand exactly what Eddie Gallagher was accused of doing. There's three things. One is killing a teenager, an ISIS, wounded combatant. The second is shooting civilians. I mean, he bragged that he shot 80 people, 20 a day. In fact, his teammates were so concerned that they took the firing pin out of his sniper rifle. And the third thing was obstruction of justice, which was he was threatening people who were filing complaints against him for doing so. This is not someone who should be held up as a hero. This is not someone where we're talking about rules of engagement, which is a legitimate thing. You talk about hostile intent or hostile action. This is not someone who in the throes of combat made a split-second decision that turned out to be wrong. This is someone over the course of a year was doing things that were so egregious that his teammates were really worried that he was not right in the head and filed complaints over and over again that were ignored. And that's who Trump is holding up. This isn't, as Malcolm said, this is someone who most likely is more akin to a murderer than anything else. I mean, it is very disturbing. And again, as the former Secretary of Navy said, Trump doesn't understand what it is to have, a sense of duty, a sense of honor. And look, the military in these terrible times, the teammates that came forward, that had to speak up against a brother and say, this is not right. And that is pretty damning. I mean, to do that takes a tremendous amount of courage, the same amount of courage it took Thompson to land that helicopter. And Trump just really, those are the people we should be holding up as heroes, not Eddie Gallagher.
Right.
But, Malcolm, there is a through line between Donald Trump's attitude toward the military. He thinks generals are owned by him. They're his generals, like on a chessboard. But there also is this sense of cruelty toward, to be blunt, war veterans who are not white. I mean, you look at the fact that he treated Khizr Khan despicably and horribly during the campaign, attacked him personally, even though he's a Gold Star father. And then there was this attitude that what this man did, Gallagher did, he did to Muslims. He did, what happened in Vietnam was done to Vietnamese people. Is that an unfair sort of through line to make, that these are people who are not considered valuable?
No, and we all know that Donald Trump is a racist.
Trump,
I mean, well, of course. I mean, Donald Trump's white supremacy is very well known. I mean, every channel has, other than Fox News, has reported on his attitudes towards other peoples, the entire Muslim ban, his hiring of Stephen Miller, who is an unabashed, almost open white nationalist. This is him posing for his tribe, using men of honor, people who were serving in the military, to make it look like he's a tough guy. But he wants to be, I mean, I'm going to give everyone homework tonight. Go watch the movie The Dirty Dozen from the mid-'60s, right? Lee Marvin. It's 12 people who are all going into war, into a special mission where they're going to die because they're in prison, and this is their only chance. The one character who is truly crazy insane is Telly Savalas, who actually on the mission rapes and murders a woman. And it's almost as if Donald Trump thought, hey, that's my favorite character. He has a mindset of where he thinks his personal toughness is men doing horrible things. I am a war fighter. Okay, I have served in every war in combat action since 1981, minus the invasion of Panama and Grenada. So I know what it takes to actually have to ratchet it down and to serve with honor and make sure that your troops, your sailors, your Marines aren't doing anything they shouldn't be doing. And that's what Spencer was talking about, where we have an ethos. And in fact, the magazine of the Navy SEAL community is called Ethos, because their tribe are men who are fighting tough missions, very hard conditions, almost without end, where they have to still maintain the honor, ethos, and ethics of all those honorable war fighters who have served before them. 175 men have had their tridents taken from them in the last 10 years. Why Donald Trump wants to politically use this particular person is because he's going to make him a totem pole and a touchstone on the campaign trail. And in so doing it, he will dishonor anyone that criticizes him. It's disgraceful.
And didn't, Naveed, I believe Nixon did something similar in terms of using Cali as a campaign sort of totem, no?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, Joy. I mean, make no mistake, Nixon, if he had run for re-election, was trying to appeal to the white Southern conservative voter. And for many of those hawkish people during the Vietnam War, they looked at Cali as, you know, as worth more than a Vietnamese life. That why should we be imprisoning a soldier for doing his job? And I think, to Malcolm's point, this is exactly what we're talking about here. That look, war is hell, and we dehumanize people. You have to do it to sort of be able to do what you do. But that doesn't mean that you don't have rules, that we don't have standards, that we don't have a moral compass. And Trump is attacking that very specific part of the institution.
Yeah, and I believe he used him sort of rhetorically in his re-elect, but yes, and I think he continues to sort of tout him and use his sort of mercy toward him as a thing to appeal to white conservative voters. Thank you both for being here. I want to make a quick correction. This is a pretty big correction. Earlier in the segment, as we were talking about former Navy Secretary Richard Spencer, we mistakenly showed the wrong image of white supremacist Richard Spencer. Very deeply sorry for that mistake. We want to thank Malcolm and Naveed for being on the show today, as usual.